everyone. I'm so excited to be here in the ShopStyleCon today. I'm Sakshi, and I'm currently working as a software engineer in a fintech company. Lately, I've seen that either companies have already adopted microservices or are rushing to do so. It's such a buzzword in the industry today, but also quite misunderstood. Either we don't quite understand what microservices are, or we don't know when to build one. The question that I want to ask today is this. Do we really want to move towards a microservice-based architecture because of the benefit it provides, or are we just trying to jump on the bandwagon? Some of the big companies today have adopted microservices: Amazon, Netflix, LinkedIn, Uber, Twitter, Spotify, the apps that are such an essential part of our daily lives. These companies have not only just adopted the microservice architecture, but embraced it, citing that they have seen incredible growth and are able to scale better than ever before. So before we see why do they think it's better, let's first discuss what is a monolith. And this is the first thing that comes up to my mind when I think of a monolith, right? A system in which all code is deployed as a single process connected to probably a database. We can then have multiple instances of this process for scaling purposes. So a monolith is basically just a unit of deployment when all functionalities in a system has to be deployed together. And these monoliths can take various forms. The single process monolith, which we just saw in the diagram prior to this. The modular monolith, where the single process consists of separate modules, which you can then work on independently, but then you still have to deploy them together. And the last is the distributed monolith, where we have multiple services, but the entire system has to be deployed together. Microservices, on the other hand, are independently deployable, which are modeled around a business domain. So two keywords here. First, they are independently deployable. That means a change in one service won't affect the other. And second, that they are modeled around a business domain, which brings with it a set of benefits of domain-driven design that we don't have time for today. Both of these are very two different architectural styles having their own pros and cons. But these days, some people use the word monolith quite interchangeably with legacy systems. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, our architecture is this way, and it's quite a big monolith because it's a legacy system. So now, although I do understand where they're coming from, monolithic approach is just an architectural choice, just like any other. It still might be an appropriate choice for some use cases, and it might not work for others, which is also true for microservice-based architecture. Isn't a one-size-fits-all strategy. It's a conscious decision that you make for your own use case, for your own system. For example, monolithic architecture works really well for people in startups who just started their business, and the business domains is not really clear yet. The business is still evolving. Also helps when your team size is small, or if you just want to create a simple application to validate your use case, like a proof of concept, doesn't need the complexity of microservices. Having said that, monolith also do come up with their challenges. Because it's a single unit of deployment, you have to redeploy the entire application, even if you change a few lines of code, making it tightly coupled. Since we also tend to put all kinds of related and unrelated code in the same place, monoliths tend to have no cohesion. It also isn't as resilient because just a single bug can potentially bring the entire application down. If you're in a big organization and you have a lot of people working in the same code, they can get into each other's ways. This applies to developers having merge conflicts or delay in approving pull requests. But it can also apply to the business. When you have all kinds of business functionality in the same application, you might also have different business owners, and they might or might not agree with the product backlog or the release timings, which can also slow time to market, and that is in the scalable solution. So should you then move to microservices because of all the things I just mentioned? Or if you'll ask me why should you move to microservices, my answer to that would be move to a microservice-based approach if you're facing problems that you cannot solve with your current piece of architecture. One reason for that could be to improve team autonomy. So as I just mentioned, developers and business owners can get into each other's ways. When you think about it, this is just blurred lines of ownership. Having a microservice-based approach can improve team autonomy. Keeping the organization team small has its advantages. They're tightly knit, they don't have a lot of bureaucracy, and they have the power and the responsibilities to make their own decisions. You could also then use it to reduce time to market by being able to make and deploy changes to individual microservices without having to wait for approvals or coordinated releases. We potentially have the power to release functionalities to our customers much more faster. These individual microservices can also then be scaled independently, which can help us to cost effectively scale. That means scaling up only those components that is currently not able to handle load, following up with scaling down the components which are under less load, or potentially even just turning them off when they're not required. That gives us so much more control over operational costs. You can also use it to improve robustness. So since functionality is decomposed, an impact on one area won't bring down the whole system. We can then focus our time and energy on the components that does require us to fix things, while still having the confidence that the other part of the business is functional, operational, and untouched. But as it is rightly said, microservices also isn't just a free lunch. It comes up with its own set of trade-offs. The biggest trade-off being just the fact that it's a distributed system, and distributed systems are complex. Since this is based on a service-oriented architecture, we have to deal with how these systems talk and interact with each other over a network. So we have to deal with latencies. Latencies can vary, making the systems unpredictable. Network packets can get lost, and network calls can also fail. We also have to deal with consistency of data to ensure that each node has the same understanding of the data in hand. Since microservices has a decentralized data system, transactions on data is also distributed, which can cause consistency issues. So we need to figure out how to detect when data is out of sync and then perform operations accordingly. We might also have to worry about the operational complexity, having to manage a large number of services, their deployments, monitoring, debugging. Without the slowly rising culture of DevOps would be a nightmare to manage. So if there is just one thing that I would want you to take away from this talk is to not see Monolith as bad or microservices as good. Both of them are different architectural patterns that you can decide to choose based upon your use case. Microservices shouldn't be the end goal. It should never be the end goal. The understanding that you get successful or you win just by having microservices is simply not true. You need to know what problem you're trying to solve and then tackle that problem using the microservices approach. If you just break down your monolith into 20 different microservices without addressing the problem in hand, well, you just created that problem 20 times over. Be mindful, be conscious of the decision. Also, as James Lewis says, and I quote, microservices buys you options. The word buy here is deliberate, meaning that it has a cost. These are the trade-offs, and then you have to decide whether the cost is worth doing it now and then over again. I think that's me. I would love to take any more questions.
Awesome. Wonderful talk. Really loved it. I really loved understanding the trade-offs, like that Monolith and microservices were not these kind of like, neither one is perfect and they both have trade-offs. And I really liked your point at the end where it's like, if you have a problem, moving to microservices will just, will create it 20 times over. That's a very good point. I was wondering, out of the three reasons why for microservices, which were robustness, autonomy, and deploy time, Do you have a favorite one that's like very beneficial over the others?
If I have to choose one, I think I would pick team autonomy.
Oh yeah.
Also, because I think this is also causes a lot of problems in the long run.
Mm.
Because, as I said, when you have a lot of business functionalities and also technical people in the same piece of code, there's bloodlines of ownership. So you don't know who to contact and what to do. You don't really gel around with each other. So what do? You just create more chaos in the end. So it's important that you distribute the services with clear business boundaries, have their own separate owners, and give more power and responsibilities to that system and the set of owners so that they can just make the decisions on their own. It would then also help with the second and the third point of saying that.
Yeah. Oh, that makes total sense. I think team autonomy is very important, especially as you grow as a company, knowing that people are self-sufficient and that you don't have to rely on specific teams or whatever to get your product deployed or maintained or whatever is a very good point. I was actually wondering about, so you mentioned that obviously they're both not perfect and they both have different use cases and problems. Is there a particular use case or problem that monoliths solve really well, that you would recommend a monolith for? Does that make sense? Sorry, I rambled around the question a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. I think Monolith works really well for people in startups again because they are still evolving. They still are trying to understand what the business domain is, and they are still trying to understand how the business will evolve. So since they don't have a clear understanding of the business domains, it works really well for people in startups. Once you evolve the company, it makes sense. Also, because if you start with a microservice-based approach when you are still evolving, you might have to just rework all over again once you have a better understanding. So start with the monolith first, and then it's an iterative process of understanding your business and then moving your system towards in that direction as well.
Yeah, I like that. An iterative process is a very good point. I think that those are all my questions. You were very good at explaining everything, so thank you so much. Up next, we'll be having Bunmi